Kate Towsey.
Hi, my name is Kate Towsey and I'm the Research Operations Manager at Atlassian, based here in Sydney. I'm here to share with you today the war stories and triumphs I've experienced in setting up research operations at Atlassian. I'm hoping in sharing these stories that you'll be able to learn from them if you go out and set up research operations in a large organization too, or even a small one. So what do I mean by war stories and triumphs? Well, in terms of war stories, I'm not talking about blazing guns and bazookas in the battlefields. And in terms of triumphs, I'm not talking about the much-loved iconic motorcycle brand. Instead, and here's a Merriam-Webster definition, I'm talking about a story, thankfully in research operations, not involving an element of danger, but certainly involving hardship and definitely much adventure, even some misadventure. And in terms of triumph, the definition is a notable success, and I'm pleased to say we've definitely had plenty of those. So 2.5 years ago, I was asked to come and work for Atlassian in Australia and set up really the first research operations team for them, really get the function going across the organization and across the globe. I had never worked in corporate. I'd always been a consultant working for public sector predominantly, and I'd never been further east than India. So this was a real adventure for me, both professionally and personally. When I arrived, there was almost a desert of research operations. There was very little here, which is what you'd expect when you've been asked to kind of set something up and get it going. There was, however, this is 2018, one person doing some research recruitment and some administration. I'm really strong on the idea, and this is a theme you'll hear throughout this talk, on the fact that research operations is not research admin, that it's very difficult to achieve impact at scale, one of the promises of research op, and efficiency at scale if you're going to continue to focus on admin. There were no recruitment vendors onboarded. There were just 2 tools available to researchers. 2 tools is not a bad thing. This was a way overpriced survey tool and a equally overpriced unmoderated research tool. And there was a hard-to-access internal recruitment panel, which I have to say was built in 2018, a really good job of it too. And we've built on that since then, and it's really become a valuable resource. There was also just an NDA for consent, which is something we've worked on a lot, and I'll speak more about that. An NDA is a non-disclosure agreement, and it really just looks after the organization. It doesn't look after the participant at all. So this is what I call my Miss World moment. As every research ops lead or manager will know, when you first arrive in an organization and forevermore, everybody wants you to fix participant recruitment. I said, I'm going to give research participants to all Atlassians, something akin to the cliche of Miss World saying that she's going to deliver on world peace. I didn't know how many PWDRs, or people who do research, there were in the organization. I knew there were 10 researchers, and I made an assumption that there were like some people in the organization doing research. I now call these AWDRs, Atlassians who do research, and this includes designers, content designers, product managers, even some engineers, and of course researchers. So it really is kind of this catchphrase that I've got for democratized research, if you want to use that term. I don't always love it, but it's there. So what I did, with not knowing how many AWDRs there were and how many we'd be serving, I set up a full service desk, or recruitment desk. In terms of full service, it was about saying, just submit a ticket via this Jira service desk, being Atlassian, and I hired one research ops coordinator to man that service desk. She's very experienced in research recruitment, and we will find the participants for you, we'll schedule them for you, and once your session is complete, we'll send them a thank you gift for you. So you didn't have to pay any money or feel the hard work of participant recruitment at all. I now know that there are 500 Atlassians who do research. Considering we're a 5,000 person organization, that's like 10% of the organization, are people who want to be close to customers and understand what the customers want and get to know their stories. And so the only thing sitting between my one research ops coordinator and those 500 people was the service desk. The war story behind this, and there's plenty of war stories in this misadventure, was we had no idea how much research Atlassians were doing, and it turns out a lot of Atlassians are doing a lot of research. Our service desk and the ops coordinator, who thankfully has stuck with me, was quickly overwhelmed. We went from a 2-week turnaround, or a promise of a 2-week turnaround, to a 5-week turnaround in research recruitment requests, and soon we had a long waiting list. So instead of showing that as research operations we were going to bring efficiency at scale, what we were actually delivering was impatient people who had projects that were being delayed, and we were only making the team we worked with in research and insights looking disorganized and incompetent, which really wasn't our aim. Also, we supported all research recruitment requests. It wasn't about strategically important research. If you submitted a ticket, you got your participants, provided you over time were willing to wait. And that was a problem. We set up an expectation that research is cheap and easy. No one understood how much it costs to recruit participants, and no one knew how much effort it would take to get high-quality participants in the room. And that turned out to be a problem too. It's something that we learned from, and I'll build on that fact later. Crucially, we also didn't have time to build out the operations because we were so busy running around trying to help everybody with their research recruits and trying to be that administrator that we never got time to build out the operations. We were never going to be able to deliver research recruitment at scale. The operations that we were using were really difficult to use, and we could never have improved that. We simply didn't have the time. But there were triumphs even in this context. Importantly, we learned what it takes to deliver on research recruitment. I now know that it takes one well-organized, experienced research recruiter with great operations behind them, around about a month to deliver on 10 to 15 to say 20 recruitment projects. That's around about the scale you can look at. That's highly dependent. I know that my research recruitment lead always gets annoyed when I say that because it's really highly dependent on how complex the recruitment requests are. If they're easy requests, which are often from more experienced researchers, ironically, it can be much, much quicker to find those participants. I got much more strategic in how we were going to deliver on research operations in Atlassian, and I'll talk about what we did next. I carved out a brand new direction so we could make a lasting mark, so we could really live up to the promise of research operations of efficiency and impact at scale, those kind of 3 words that everybody leans into, and rightly so. So one of the primary lessons from that time, to cap that off, is that the value of administration is one-on-one and it quickly evaporates. Someone comes for help and you have to be focused on them almost 100%. You get that piece of work done, they're happy, they walk off, someone's right behind them. And then that person will come back as soon as they've done their research and they want more help. And so you're always having to scale proportionate to the amount of work that people want done. It's very difficult to scale unless you've got infinite amounts of headcount and resources. Whereas well-maintained operations can potentially serve hundreds of people, and the impact can be lasting as well. Lesson number 2, and this is a big one. I kind of spoke about this briefly when I said that really you kind of just submit a ticket. It was just too easy. It felt too easy, other than the fact that we couldn't look after the demand. Be aware of operationalizing for more and more and faster research. I like to think of this as roadrunner research, hence the image. Any research manager or researcher worth their salt knows that it's not about more and more and faster. It's about the right amount of research done really well. Just getting the right amount of high quality insights to make a difference to that product or service. So in 2019, we made a big change. We pivoted entirely. Instead of looking after Atlassians who do research, we turned our attention to look after only the researchers. And by this time, in over 2019, the team grew from just 10 or 15 researchers when I first arrived to 50 researchers is where we're at the end of 2019 and where we are now. Crucially, we also turned away from offering full service operations to looking at and offering a self-service operations. My team grew as well, so that I was in a good place and had the skills to be able to devise self-service operations for our researchers. So this meant that researchers could look after themselves when it came to research recruitment, but we would look after all the procurement and the finances and the guidance and the vendor relationships and all the guidance and everything to be able to use those services. So we were going to build a full ecosystem for them. So this is a list of the things that we did in 2019. As a brand new team, we had a really big year, and I'm very proud of it. We went from no research recruitment vendors in 2018 to procuring and onboarding 10 different research recruitment vendors, including some of the really fantastic new tools like User Interviews and Respondent and Askable, that are these kind of self-serve platforms, or the Ubers of research recruitment, as I call them. We put together a research operations handbook, which I'll show you now. It's a handbook that lives in Confluence, of course, and it is accessible to the researchers, giving them written guidance and information on how to recruit participants, how to recruit from our internal panel, the Atlassian Research Group, how to manage research data, how to take informed consent and what the process looks like, and that it's not just a form, what research tooling they had available to them, and a whole lot more. We gave them self-serve access to the Atlassian Research Group, to that internal panel. We migrated it from the very difficult to use survey tool that really is like hard to learn, and you need to kind of constantly be using it to know how to use it. And we migrated it into User Interviews Hub, which was a real game changer. We devised a comprehensive consent form and process in partnership with legal, and I'll talk more about that later. It was really like wonderful piece of work for us. We produced good data management practices and guidelines around how to manage your data well as a researcher. We also onboarded a video repository or video library tool, and other tooling as well, so that researchers, at least in terms of the video library, could make much better use of their video, and they could store it securely as well. We made a start in operations for accessibility. There's a lot of work to be done there still, but it's a real learning curve for us. It's a world unto its own, operationalizing for accessibility. And importantly, especially in 2020, with COVID and everything that's been going on, in 2019, we started up this kind of lighthearted function called Cake Ops, which at that point really was about sending cakes to our offices around the world for celebrations within the research and insights team, sometimes gifts for condolences as well. This year, that's turned into e-cards for birthdays, condolences, for other celebrations, but also R&I, or Research and Insights, swag boxes to keep us connected as a team. We took over all the procurement and finances for Research and Insights, which was a really important role to do. We're really starting to run the team as a highly operational and very well organized business that we're in lockstep with finance. And we offer training and support for researchers outside of the handbook. We would do onboarding sessions, and we give training on informed consent and data management practices, something that we've really expanded on this year. So to recap, in 2018, when I arrived, it was this desert of operations. And in 2019, having done all that work, it essentially was this jungle. Lots and lots of foliage and stuff to look at and use and walk around, but really actually quite hard to navigate. The war story is that there were just too many recruitment vendors to choose from. Which one do I use and when? There were too many processes. There was too much information. And as a result, people didn't have the time to onboard into all these different processes, and people who had onboarded into them wouldn't remember it all and understand where to go when they needed what. It was still hard, even with all the vendors and pathways we had for recruitment, to access enterprise customers, and even harder to access accessibility customers. So the lesson from here was needing to really look very specifically at the needs and design for those. There were also quirks in our systems as our vendors were improving a lot of our vendors are brand new, they're startups in this emerging market. And there were various quirks in their systems that we would have to pass on to the researcher. You have individuals in my team delivering a quirk each, and that's several quirks for the researcher in their workflow. And that created some support that we needed to offer to them. The triumphs were that we had great foundations in place, really good foundations for learning what worked and what didn't work, and how to scale. We had loads of resources and support for the researchers, and some of them really worked, others didn't so much. And we were able to learn that. Research data was being looked after really well, and legal loved us for that, and we felt really proud of the work we did there. Researchers now reach out to us all the time for help, and they know who we are. Sounds like a small thing, but as a brand new team in a very busy, fast-paced space, this was a really wonderful thing to get right. We've learned a lot about delivering operations at scale, and it's something that we've really leaned into this year in 2020. And last but not least, we've become real experts in our specialisms. As a team in an emerging space, and certainly as a manager, it's very difficult to hire people who have lots of research ops experience. And researchers tend to want to stick with research, There are more and more researchers interested in becoming research ops specialists. And so I've hired people who come from marketing backgrounds and communications and IT and technology and procurement, and they've had to learn about research on the way. In 2019, it was very much about that bonding and learning and understanding, and that's an amazing team now. One of the biggest triumphs was informed consent. As I mentioned, we had this NDA that was being used as informed consent in 2018. It was a non-disclosure agreement only. It provided only protection to Atlassian. It cared nothing for the participant, and it was maybe applicable in the USA. The participant agreement that we produced in partnership with legal and privacy is relevant in the US, the EU under GDPR, Australia and Canada, so some of the most stringent privacy regulations in the world. It includes an NDA. It's readable. You don't have to have a degree in like law to understand what it means. It's tickable, so you can tick what you agree to and what you don't, which means that it's individual to you. It's digitally signed and stored, and you're de-identified as a participant once you've signed that form. It's got data governance practices associated with it, and it's also accessibility friendly. It's got clauses within it that look after people with access requirements and their data specifically, but the actual form itself is now also access friendly as well. Here's a quick view of the form. On the left-hand side is the old NDA. Looks like you need to spend some time in the Supreme Court and have on a curly wig to be able to understand it. And on the right-hand side is our new form, which is plain English, human readable. It's a short form, and really just a couple of pages for someone to go through and understand in a short amount of time. So the lesson was, don't throw the kitchen sink at your researchers. I, in fact, had my team trained up on service design so that we think more like service designers. Everything's very quick, particularly when you just arrive in an organization and there's nothing there. But I think if I were to go back, I might take some time to step back, certainly to understand how many people there are even doing research in the organization, and to really try and understand the needs up front. Basic stuff, but it can be easy to miss when you're in a rush. So in 2019, we had created this jungle, which was very hard to navigate. What we're working on in 2020 is how do we put pathways into this jungle, into this forest? So less of jungle and more like a beautifully maintained national park with signs that say, take the right path to go to the waterfall. On the left path there, avoid the bear on the switchback, which is a real experience I had in Yosemite last year. I now know, of course, as I mentioned earlier, that there are 500 Atlassians who do research, and this year we're scaling back out to those people. We're going back to our intended goal in 2019, that Miss World moment, but with a completely different approach. And so my team is bigger as well. We're still six actually. The researcher went back to research, but I've got someone working on impact and engagement. How do we have impact in our communications within and without Atlassian, sort of inside and outside of Atlassian. I've also got someone who's working full-time on procurement and finances, which is a very valuable and amazing thing. And so as a team, We are taking our self-service operations back out to 500 Atlassians who do research. We're actually at this point in a pilot, and we're looking after 200 Atlassians who do research, and onboarding them into a much more curated set of tools. We also have, within each of the 8 teams that are part of our pilot, we have a champion in each team who is not part of the research ops team. They're a designer or a content designer or someone in the product team, but they're the person who's really the go-between between us as research ops and their team, and understands their needs and helps us to administer some of the tools. And this has so far been a really successful strategy. So here are the things that we're doing in 2020. As I mentioned, we're rolling out our ops to all Atlassians, but a stripped back version of our operations. So it's much more clear and easy to see what to use when. There are only 3 recruitment vendors that we've chosen to stick with, not 10. We still have access to those other 7 vendors, but we only outwardly offer 3, and they really look after our needs, most of our needs. We've upped the ante on training and guidance, and we're offering 8 different education courses, including operational type things like respect in research and informed consent, and how to do good participant recruitment and how to use the tools we've got, to the 200 Atlassians who do research, plus some beyond that as well. We're working on delivering recruitment technology that is integrated with the Atlassian data lakes, that we're not creating our own little data lakes. This is a really big piece of work that, once we've got it right, would be a talk on its own. We're working on giving Atlassians better and more respectful access to our enterprise customers, and in a way that doesn't step on the toes of our account managers. And again, we're doing more work on respectful accessibility research. How do we build up those operations? We're still, as I said earlier, right in the foothills of how to get that done. So I don't have any war stories or triumphs to share on that quite yet. It looks like the champions is going to be a triumph, and certainly a triumph is scaling out self-service operations as opposed to full-service operations to much more people. As a team of 6, we're able to happily serve 200 people so far, and that's a massive difference to full service, where I've calculated I would need a team of 40 to 50 coordinators, never mind the rest of my team and never mind management levels, to be able to offer full service recruitment to that number of people. I'll have to come back in a year's time to tell you what the war stories are. I'm hoping we don't have nearly as many as we have in previous years. We've really had a big learning curve. So to quote Donna Rumsfeld, and I'm sure many research operations managers feel this as we are in this emerging field, we're trailblazers, literally. We have to kind of go in and try something out and learn the hard way. There are known knowns, there are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things that we do not know. And I'm sure that's going to be a quote I'll be reflecting on as we go from 2020 into 2021. That's it from me today. Please find me in Slack. I'm there hanging out. Please ask me anything, and I'll be responding in the chat via Loom perhaps, but also just in the chat. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Kate. We do actually have time for one quick question live now, if anyone in the room has a question for Kate.
There must be one question.
Yes, up the back.
How do you de-identify participants in your consent form? I just thought that was interesting.
So the question was, how do you de-identify participants in your consent form?
So that's a great question. It's quite a complex one, but the short version is that once the participant signs the consent form, they will then be automatically emailed a participant, like a consent ID, and they will then give that to the researcher. It's that ID that is tagged then to all of their video content and anything that's captured afterwards. And so we don't keep their name. They get like a personalized ID. I will say we've got some work to do on that. We'd love it to be that we automatically, that ID just is automatically carried with all the data. But for now, it's more of a manual process. But that's our next step. I'm hoping we achieve it early next year.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, it's now time for our